Welcome to the third episode of MDSI-Vaani, an MDSI initiative wherein we interview authors of exciting papers in the field of movement disorders from India. I am Dr. Divyani Garg, and I will be your host for this podcast. And in today's episode, we will be interviewing Dr. Rukmini Mridula, Associate Professor of Neurology at Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences, Hyderabad, and a movement disorders specialist. And this interview will be focused on a recent publication, a collaborative effort of the PRAI or the PRAI, entitled Clinical Study of 668 Indian Subjects with Juvenile, Young, and Early-onset Parkinson's Disease. Now, this is a cross-sectional study spanning 2 years and 10 specialty movement disorders clinics across India. And Dr. Rukmini, a very warm welcome to the third episode of MDSI-Vaani. Thank you so much for joining me today, and permit me to congratulate you as well as all co-authors on this huge effort.
Thank you, Dr. Divyani. That's very nice. I'm really honored to be here, and it's a nice platform to actually project what PRAI is doing, and hopefully we can move forward with more members who would be interested in joining the PRAI also.
Yes, ma'am. And that would bring me to my very first question, and also for the benefit of some of our newer listeners. What is the Parkinson Research Alliance of India? How did it come about? Who is it? What is it? What is it focused on?
Okay, so the Parkinson's Research Alliance of India is actually the brainchild of Dr. Madhuri Bihari. Professor Madhuri Bihari was retired from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Actually, this is actually modeled on Parkinson's study group from USA, where they have actually done quite a bit of research, where a lot of centers who are interested in research in movement disorders are getting together and doing their own. It's an institute-funded research as well as the medical pharmaceutical sponsored research. So initially it was actually based on they had a grant between the US and the Indo. There was a US Indo NIH grant in which Dr. Kapil Sethi and Dr. Madhuri Bihari got together, and they started this whole whole society. The society was started in 2011. But at that time, we were just in the initial stages. And at that time, Dr. Pramod Pal, Dr. Asha Kishore, Dr. Rupam Borgohain, Dr. Shamal Kumar Das, these were the main people who were actually involved in it, along with Dr. Vinay Goel from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Dr. Meena Gupta, Dr. G.M. Bali. So they all sat together, and then they decided that there should be a new group. The initial 3-4 years was they went on with how to go about it. And so in 2015, Dr. Rupam Borgohain actually got the organization registered, but still we didn't have any funds at that particular point. So the initial registration had just 7 members for the society to be registered. It's actually registered under the Society Act in Hyderabad. But then we also invited all members from all over the country who are interested in doing research in movement disorders. And the first initiative of this was the GOPI-YOPD, or the Genetics of Parkinsons in India in young-onset Parkinson's disease. So the main idea was to look at the genetics of Parkinson's disease in India, because at that time we really didn't have any data which had a huge number of population. And this was actually formulated and completely, it was started with Dr. Prashant, who approached the MedGenome group, who were, they were kind enough to help us out with this project without any monetary benefit. So we didn't have any money to do the project, but the MedGenome had arranged for people to collect the samples. So it was all a researcher initiated project where everybody put in their own money, got their own coordinators, and did the work. And then the thing is that it is still not complete. Part of it is complete. We have collected somewhere around 1,000 patients with young-onset Parkinson's disease, but then the genetics of it has to be still evolved. So they have actually looked at the genetics of around 100 samples and found some interesting findings, but they are looking at the entire cohort, and hopefully we will get to know more about it. So this is the first project, but luckily after that, because of Movement Disorder Society of India, which also started simultaneously, a lot of money is being donated from the Movement Disorder Society of India conferences, which happen in Hyderabad and Delhi and in Generalizability Institute. So hopefully the organization is growing slow and steadily. So anybody who's interested can just join us all. So right now, Dr. Rupam Borgohain is the secretary, Dr. Madhuri Bihari is the president, and we have members from all over the country who are just interested in it. So we don't. So we there are some rules and regulations, but anybody who's interested in it, once they come in, they'll get it.
Okay, and I'm sure with such stalwarts as guiding lights, it's just going to grow by leaps and bounds. Yeah, so let us just get into the nitty-gritties of the study. In the study has basically proposed age cutoffs for the definition of juvenile onset as less than 20 years, for young onset as 20 to less than 40 years, and then for early onset PD as 40 to 50 years. Now, what are the diagnostic and therapeutic implications of proposing such an age cutoff? And also within the spectrum of young onset Parkinson's disease, what is truly the significance of threshing them out further into these subcategories?
So this is a very important question, because when we started the project, there was a lot of debate on whom should we include in the project, whether it was to be 40 or the cutoff should be 50 when we thought of doing young onset Parkinson's disease. So we went into the study without seriously thinking about the cutoffs actually. So once we had the results, then we looked at the initial studies which was done by Japan. I mean, there was a study from Japan which had around 30 people, and then it was, Professor Nealquin who had proposed it. We all thought of 40 years as a cutoff for young onset Parkinson's disease. Juvenile, just because it's a very young onset, less than 20 is considered as juvenile onset Parkinson's disease. But this 40 to 50 was very vague. I mean, after that, people started using 45 as cutoff or 50 as cutoff. So when we looked at the results after we finished the study, at least on the clinical features of the patients who had Parkinson's disease, we realized that 40 to 50 years the patients who were age 40 to 50 were completely different from those who were actually less than 40. So that's when we discussed it with Professor Nyanquin again, and then we decided that there is definitely a difference between people who were less than 40 and from 40 to 50, at least in the Indian population. Less than 40 years, they were more prone to have dystonias, and they were more prone to have gait disturbances, freezing, falls, along with non-motor symptoms like apathy, anxiety, which is much more common in the less than 40 years of age. And those who were from 40 to 50, they were more or less similar to our older onset Parkinson's disease. So they had more, RBD and sleep disturbances. The juvenile onset Parkinson's disease actually in our group was small, around 25 patients, and she predominantly, but then most of our patients were born of consanguineous parentage. Family history was there in 25% of them. So most likely these were genetic mediated population, Parkinson's disease, and they also had more dystonias and gait disturbances and a lot of apathy and non-motor symptoms which were there. There's a difference in there is the whole, it's still the number of people in each study which has been done before is actually fairly less. So it's around, the maximum number was somewhere around 400. So I think this is the largest cohort. So we probably are at a better position to probably categorize what the clinical features of patients with Parkinson's are.
So this is, as you have mentioned, a huge cohort, 668 subjects, and it is the largest cohort of younger patients with Parkinson's disease in the world. Now, can you just summarize for the benefit of our listeners the basic demographic and clinical profile of these 668 participants? And also, who did you include and who did you exclude?
Okay, so we've included patients who are Parkinson's disease patients who were less than 50 years of age. And they came from all parts of the country. Around 30% of them were from the north and 30% from south. And around 20% were from the eastern side, and the 10% from western side. The western population was a little less in this group. The male to female ratio was somewhere around 2:1. And we also included people who had a family history of Parkinson's disease, but all of them are less than 50 years of age in this cohort. So the clinical features of most of them was that 80% of them, of all the groups, had tremor at onset. Almost 90% of them had an asymmetrical onset. So they actually follow the typical pattern of Parkinson's disease, where tremor and asymmetry was prominent. And this is much more common in the Indian population compared to the rest of the world. But in terms of the other symptoms like dystonia, which was much more commoner in the young onset Parkinson's disease as well as the juvenile Parkinson's disease, compared to the patients who were from 40 to 50 years, whom we labeled as early onset Parkinson's disease. So, and they were more the off dystonias and even the on dystonias was much more common in the juvenile Parkinson's disease patient. In the young onset Parkinson's disease patient, they also had predominantly gait disturbances, freezing and falls, which are much more commoner in the young onset Parkinson's disease compared to the early onset. The ones who, the patients with 40 to 50 years of age, they had more percentage of RBDs and sleep disturbances, which are commoner in the older onset Parkinson's disease patients. When it came to the treatment response and the side effect profile, all of them responded well to dopaminergic medication. Most of them were on levodopa and carbidopa combination. The early onset Parkinson's disease, the ones who were from 40 to 50, actually had much more polypharmacy compared to the young onset and the juvenile Parkinson's disease. Dyskinesias were seen quite commonly in all the three groups, but to our surprise, we expect that the younger onset Parkinson's disease patients have dyskinesias earlier, but to our surprise, actually the early onset Parkinson's disease, the ones who were from 40 to 50, had dyskinesias earlier in their disease course compared to the young onset and the juvenile Parkinson's disease patient. Like the juvenile Parkinson's disease patient had dyskinesia probably around 9 to 9.5 years later. They were the ones with the longest disease duration. So maybe there's a bias because the numbers are small in the juvenile Parkinson's disease group, and maybe they were stable enough to come to the hospital at that particular point.
And you have touched on several aspects actually, so we'll just pick up a few of those and talk about those. So as per the findings of the study and your observations, how do younger Indian patients differ from or are similar to their counterparts worldwide?
So the worldwide, the studies have shown that patients who have younger onset Parkinson's disease, they have typically an akinetic rigid phenotype with lesser prevalence of tremor. Seen in around 40 to 50% of the patients with young onset Parkinson's disease worldwide. And they also have dystonia, predominant dystonia and bradykinesia predominant phenotype. Compared to that, our patients actually had tremor. Still, the predominant mode of presentation was tremor, that was asymmetrical tremor. And few of them had, and they also had an added component of dystonia, but this is what was seen. The other thing that we notice is that if you look at the worldwide literature, the young onset Parkinson's disease patients tend to have dyskinesias very early on in their disease course. Some of them reporting dyskinesias even at the even after a short duration of levodopa therapy. Yeah. So we also had a similar. There were some people who actually had dyskinesias which were earlier, but in general, our patients actually behave much more like older age Parkinson's disease patients who had tremor predominant with dyskinesias occurring at 5 years of disease duration. So our Parkinson's disease patients actually were more or less like the older Parkinson's disease, much more like older Parkinson's disease compared to the young onset worldwide.
The Movement Disorder Society of India is a vibrant community of individuals interested in the field of movement disorders. I would encourage our listeners to become members of this rapidly expanding society.
This observation is actually divergent from the classical notion of younger patients with Parkinson's disease that has been observed worldwide. What do you think I know you've touched on a few of the reasons, but what do you think could be the difference among Indian patients as compared to their Western counterparts or other counterparts in the world?
This is an interesting question, Amin, and there have been a lot of thought processes before we did the study. One of the postulates has been that Indians are much more prone to develop Parkinson's disease at an earlier age compared to those who are in the Western world. So there was a study which has been done by Dr. Charulata Shankla who looked at the average age, or a lot of other people who have done a few demographic studies. We found that the average age of onset of Parkinson's disease probably is a few years, probably a decade lesser than that in the Western world. That is one possibility. And the second possibility is that probably our genetic makeup is a little different. It's been known that we don't really have so much of alpha-synuclein mutations, which is very commonly seen in the Western population. Our genetic predominant mutations are in Parkinson. LRRK2 mutations, the ones that are commonly prevalent in the Western world, is also not seen as commonly in India. So probably our genetic makeup is different.
Okay.
So that's why we probably have a different.
Yeah. You also commented on the treatment patterns that were observed. Something that I noticed while going through the paper was that the prevalence of non-motor symptoms was pretty high. In fact, depression and anxiety were present in 45% of the cohort. Panic attacks were present in nearly 20% of the cohort. So as compared to that, when we look at the treatment patterns in terms of pharmacotherapy for non-motor symptoms, the prevalence the usage of these drugs is probably very less as compared to the actual prevalence of the non-motor symptoms. What are your comments on these treatment patterns that you observed, both for motor and non-motor symptoms?
So the motor symptoms, I think we follow more or less whatever has been proposed by the Western world. But we still, I think most of our doctors and movement disorder specialists actually don't hesitate on giving levodopa and carbidopa, which is very commonly used with young onset Parkinson's. 80% of them have it. I was a little surprised.
Yes, that was a surprise.
Tend to start on pramipexole or other dopamine agonists like ropinirole or roticotin patch or MAO-B inhibitors. But to the contrary, I think it's also the financial aspect and also the ease of administration. I think a lot of medical doctors who give the medicines in the initial stages. So levodopa carbidopa is very commonly used. Anticholinergics are very commonly used. I mean, that's something probably we should try and withdraw from, because long-standing anticholinergics definitely do impair the cognition in most patients with Parkinson's disease. The cost benefit is extremely good. I think all of us who have used anticholinergics will vouch for its effect on the motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Patients don't like to stop their anticholinergics, and once you start them on it. But still, on the long term, it causes severe cognitive impairment. And I think most of the Western world has stopped using anticholinergics. So probably we have to shift over from anticholinergics to giving dopamine agonists. Regarding the dopamine agonists, we haven't seen so many of impulse control disorders or other possible problems, because probably we're using it much lesser. We are using something like 50% with pramipexole. The treatment of non-motor symptoms is definitely very less. I don't think non-motor symptoms plays such a important aspect when a patient comes to a clinician's office. I think that is where probably we are missing out on the non-motor aspects of patients, and that's why we are not treating them enough. And a lot of times the spouse or the children come around and they say that, okay, the patient is fine. And so I think that's where the treatment options comes down. And I think we don't have a very good reference system to the psychiatrists. To be putting it frankly, our collaboration with psychiatrists are a little less. I think probably even if you don't have a collaboration, I think you're supposed to look at anxiety and depression and make sure that they are getting treated well. There is a fear that if you use antidepressants and antipsychotics, they may worsen the motor Parkinsonism. But that's not necessarily true in all the medications. At least some medicines are fairly safe. Can be used.
Dr. Rukmini, this is 668 subjects, a huge cohort. So, and considering all that we've discussed so far, how generalizable are these results? And specifically, in which aspects, if you think that they are generalizable to the worldwide population of younger patients with PD?
I think the generalizability is that the juvenile Parkinson's disease, what we have seen, and this is what's seen worldwide, is that they do progress more slowly compared to the older age Parkinson's disease, and they have a long duration of life with disease. So that is one aspect. And the second aspect is that they do respond well to Parkinsonian medication. They seem to have tremor predominance. So it's not necessarily that you don't have a tremor abnormality in these patients. And I think the idea would be, we are halfway through the study. So hopefully we will get the genetic makeup of our patients, and then we can also take a look at how the treatment options actually affect the patients with a particular genetic abnormality, and then we can decide on who else to go with.
Right. Yes. After this study, I mean, what we have so far, did you identify certain specific future avenues that researchers in this field can focus on, or otherwise, even if it is not derived from the study, do you think what are some of the future avenues for research in this particular field?
So the first part is that obviously we are still going on the genetic makeup of these patients. So the idea was to do somewhere around 1,500 patients with young onset Parkinson's disease. The project is still ongoing. So a lot of centers are still recruiting patients who have young onset Parkinson's disease. The other avenue that you can look at is look at the treatment options and how they are responding to the treatment options. A lot of centers offer DBS to this particular cohort. So it would be good to see whether what kind of a continuous dopaminergic stimulation, whether a levodopa pump or an apomorphine pump or DBS would work in this subset of patients. And we could probably correlate it along with the genetics of the Parkinson's disease and see which mutations would probably respond well to which treatment or treatment modality. Hopefully, if I mean, the other option possibilities that you can have is have an ongoing imaging modality, which is a little difficult in our setup, but most of the patients do have at least an imaging with MRI. So probably on a long-term basis, if we could repeat the MRI, at least in a subset of a patient, we would know how it progresses over time. So that's how it goes.
So that was my final question. Dr. Rukmini, thank you for your time and patience in answering all of these questions and for your perspective on this particular effort. We are looking forward to further results from the PRAI venture. And I have had an exciting time listening to your perspective. I'm sure as have the listeners who are listening in. So thank you once again and a massive congratulations on this effort. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure that this has been as exciting as the previous episodes of MDSI-Vaani. Take care, stay safe, and do watch out for the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.